There's a reason that they call New York City a concrete jungle, and I have to say, it is a jungle out here. Sometimes when people move to New York City, they don't have the best experience in New York City at first because they're either completely overwhelmed by the city or just intimidated by the city as a whole. And I get it. New York City is such an overwhelming place. I remember the first few times I came into the city, and I couldn't believe how big New York City was. I mean, it's literally gigantic. And at first, when you're first learning your way around the city, it's so overwhelming, especially if you're coming from a small town just like I was. I would say when you're first moving to New York City, the worst thing that you can do is spend time locked up in your apartment at home by yourself. This is the absolute worst thing that you can do, because if you do this, you're not going to have a good experience in New York City. Why would you? You're paying a lot of money to live in New York City in an apartment that's probably not that great, and you're just spending time alone inside of it by yourself. So I couldn't recommend getting outside of your apartment more. Loneliness is probably the #1 reason that I see people leaving New York City. Either the people that they hung out with have left New York City and they feel like they don't want to start over again with new people, or they just never put themselves out there and met the right group in New York City. One very common mistake that I see people make when moving to New York City is that they pick the wrong neighborhood to move to. If you've seen any of my other videos, I talk about this a lot because it's really, really important. The neighborhood that you pick to live in is honestly more important than the actual apartment home that you pick to sign a lease with. Why is that? Because that's going to make or break your experience. The streets that you walk down every day, the people that you surround yourself with every day. I want you to have the best experience possible when living in New York City, and picking the right neighborhood is going to help you do that. But how do you find the right neighborhood? That's the question that I get all the time. Now, I do suggest that when you're moving to New York City, if you can, try to spend time in the neighborhood that you're looking to live in. Now, I know that is easier said than done, and depending on where you're moving from, you might not be able to do that. Then my second best suggestion is just doing as much research as you can and asking people about the neighborhood, really trying to get as much of a feel online and from other people that you can. It definitely doesn't replace spending time there in person, but it's better than just going in blind and picking a random neighborhood because you liked the apartment. That could be one of the biggest mistakes I see people make. So if you pick the wrong neighborhood and you signed a lease, you moved to the wrong neighborhood, I do want you to know that it's not the end of the world and that you can always change the neighborhood that you live in down the line. Sometimes I come across a lot of people where they moved to New York City for the first time, they picked the wrong neighborhood, and they think that they hate New York City. Then, months later, they're able to move to a different apartment and they find out that they didn't hate New York City, they just hated that neighborhood, and it ruined their entire New York City experience. So I share this with you not to scare you, but to make you aware that the neighborhood is so important, and it's probably one of the most important decisions that you can make here. And this is why getting to know as much as you can about the city, as fast as you can, is going to make your experience that much better. And when you're able to get here to New York City, I want you to go out there and explore as many other neighborhoods as you can. And not only just in Manhattan, which pretty much everyone falls to because Manhattan is the main borough of New York City, but the other boroughs as well. You might find that you like living in an outside borough more than you might like living in Manhattan, which is very, very common. So the answer of the perfect neighborhood is really going to be different for every single person. Another thing that I see a lot of people do is they have a friend or they know someone that lives in New York City, and they move to the neighborhood that that friend or that person lives in just because that person lives there. But when they get there and start living in that neighborhood, they find that they don't love that neighborhood because it might be right for that person, but it's not right for them. That is so common. And I want you to remember that just because somebody in your life loves a neighborhood doesn't always mean that you would as well. Another mistake that I see a lot of people make when first moving to the city is that they spend all of their money that they come with really fast. New York City is very expensive. A lot of people don't know how to budget here in New York City because it's very different than really budgeting anywhere else in the world just because it's so expensive. The cost of living is just so high. So you really have to go into New York City with some type of plan about income that you're going to be bringing in every month and also the spending that you're going to be doing every month. Because if you just wing it, it can work out, and it does for a lot of people, but it can also not work out. And I see people all the time leaving New York City because they didn't have a plan in advance and they ended up blowing all their money, and then they just figured it was too hard to continue in New York City. And I don't want you to do that. You came to New York City for a reason. There's no point in blowing all of your money on just going out and having fun and doing things when you actually had a goal in mind when you were coming here. So at the same time, I don't want you to think that you can't have fun in New York City, because there are actually so many affordable ways and cheap ways to have fun in New York City, like way more than people probably think there are. Some of my favorite things to do in New York City to this day are absolutely free or like hardly cost any money. So I want you to really look into these inexpensive ways to have fun. And even when it comes to food, find cheap eats, go to local happy hours, things like that. There's a lot more of that than you probably think. So on the topic of income, if you need to, get a side hustle. There are so many people in New York City who have side hustles. Like that is like the thing to do here. I'm definitely not a big believer in doing a side hustle like long term because I think that people should have like one main focus in their life. But if you need to in the beginning, feel free to get a side hustle. There has been many times in my life where I have had a side hustle to be able to pay the rent, and I don't regret doing that at all. all because it really helped me get through that time period. And there are so many different unique side hustles you can do either here in person in New York City or online. And at some point I'll have separate content really covering that as well, because I think that's a whole video in itself. Another mistake that I see people making here in New York City is that they get distracted by all the fun in New York City and it takes away from their career. Most of the time people come here to have a better career or start a new career, and then they get distracted by the bar scene, the nightlife, the going out all the time, and then it kind of hinders their career. I admit there's probably been times in my life where I probably should have laid off the going out and spending money to focus more on my career, and it's very, very common. It happens in people's 20s. It even happens to people later in life. It's just one of those things where you have so many temptations in front of you at all times of the day, at all times, and people want to take advantage of it. They want to have fun here, and I get it, but there is also a balance. Now, New York City is also the type of place that if you spend time on the streets in New York City in the middle of the day, during the week, you will see people just dining and having a good time at pretty much all times of the day. Now, some of these people might be having business meetings and things like that, and some of these people just might be relaxing, lounging, and having a great time dining out. It's hard to be able to walk by people at all times and be like, wow, they're just having such a good time. I wish I could do that, but yeah, I have to go to work or I have to do this. And it's hard to kind of resist those temptations sometimes. But I want you to remember why you came here. And if you came here for anything career related, stay focused on your goal, because this is the place to do it. New York City has everything you can ever imagine in the world in the city. Like, you can literally buy pretty much anything you ever wanted in New York City. But at the same time, it can be a very inconvenient place because you have to either walk or take public transportation to do anything here. That makes it a little bit more complicated. Now, there was once a time in New York City where people didn't have the luxury of being able to order things online like Amazon or order food in delivery apps. It's kind of crazy to think about it, but that was literally a problem here in New York City for people in the 90s and earlier. So we need to remind ourselves how lucky we are that we have all these apps and websites that can do all these things for us right now, even though as New Yorkers, we still complain about walking to the grocery store every once in a while. But we have to remember that it used to be way harder for people in the past. So take advantage of these delivery apps. I have to say, I don't really shop much in New York City anymore. I pretty much order my groceries online. I order everything from Amazon, and I take advantage of food delivery apps every week. All these resources are going to be your best friend when you move to New York City. If you were in the suburbs beforehand, you probably got in your car and drove around to get what you wanted. And maybe sometimes you use delivery apps or things like this. But here in New York City, you're going to rely on it a lot. And you should. If you're coming to New York City single, I want you to not be afraid of dating in New York City. I hear so many stories of people who have heard horror stories and they're afraid to really put themselves out there and start dating because they're just so intimidated about the process. And I have to say, as someone who dated for a while in New York City, it is probably one of the best experiences you'll ever have in your life. Now, you'll definitely get a little bit of a thick skin, but you'll also probably have some of the best experiences and meet some of the most unique people you've ever had before. I have to say, there's just nothing like dating in New York City. And I highly advise you to go out there and meet new people, whether it's through the apps or whether you're just trying to meet people in person. It's definitely worth it to put yourself out there. And as somebody who met my husband on the apps here in New York City, I can definitely vouch for it. And overall, at first, if you're overwhelmed and intimidated, I want you to give it time. Not everyone is going to move to New York City in their first month and absolutely fall in love with New York City. A lot of times, people have this built-up imagination of what their life is going to be like in New York City. And I definitely blame media, movies, TV shows, because they kind of paint this perfect picture of New York City. And I have to tell you, it's definitely not perfect by any means, like at all. What you see in the movies and TV shows is probably not going to be your experience here. But every so often, you will have those amazing, magical moments that make it so worth it to live in New York City. And like I said, I want you to remember why you came here. Whether it's for career or you just want to put yourself out there or start over somewhere new, New York City is going to be the place for you. I just want you to hang in there and give it some time, because it will get better. And sometimes you just need to try a different neighborhood or hang out with different people to make your experience that much better. So I would love to hear from you guys in the comments. If you haven't moved to New York City yet, what are you afraid of, or what are you thinking of right now? And if you already started living in New York City, how has your experience been so far, and what tips do you have for everybody else? As always, I just love hearing from you guys in the comments.